Her true story from upstate New York, when the house you built with your own hands becomes a prison. Listen, if you have ever been 72 years old and had your own child look you in the eye and call you dead weight, then you know exactly what I am about to tell you. And if you haven't, well, I pray you never do, because there is a particular kind of pain that comes when the hands that once reached for you in the dark now push you away in the light. If this story touches something deep in your heart, please don't scroll past. Share it, comment on it. Let other women know they are not alone in this particular kind of heartbreak, because sometimes we need to hear that we are not the crazy ones. We are not the burdens. We are just women who loved too much and asked for too little in return. The smell of apple cinnamon was still hanging in the air when Michael said those words that would split my world right down the middle. You know how scents can hold memory like that, how they can make a moment stick to your soul whether you want it to or not. And that morning the kitchen still smelled like the scones I would made from scratch at 5:30, because little Emma had been crying for them the night before, and I couldn't bear to disappoint her, couldn't bear to see those big eyes fill up with tears over something as simple as Grandma's special breakfast. But Michael, my Michael, the boy I raised from 9 years old after his mama Sarah died in that terrible accident on Route 2, he stood there in my kitchen. In the kitchen where I would bandaged his scraped knees and helped him with homework and made him soup. When he was sick, he stood there pointing his finger at me like I was some stranger who would overstayed her welcome and said, "All you do is sit around and complain. Ruth, you are dead weight in this house, and frankly we are tired of carrying you." Dead weight. You know what dead weight is. Dead weight is something that serves no purpose, something that just takes up space and drags everyone else down. And that is what my own son called me. In the house I built with these hands, these weathered, arthritic hands that ache something fierce when the weather changes, but still remember every nail I hammered, every board I sanded, every coat of paint I brushed across these walls that now felt like they were closing in on me. I never expected to be 72 and homeless. Never thought the word homeless would even apply to someone like me who owns property and pays taxes and raised a good boy, or thought I raised a good boy anyway. But that is exactly where Michael's cruelty was leading me, and his wife Amanda. Lord help me, Amanda, who nodded along beside those granite countertops I would saved for 3 whole years to afford, working extra hours tutoring kids after my regular teaching job just to put something beautiful in this kitchen where we could make memories. But apparently the only memory we were making that morning was the one where I learned my place in their world. "You shuffled around here all morning making noise," Michael continued, and his voice was getting sharper with each word, like a knife being sharpened on stone, banging pots, humming those old songs, acting like you own the place. Some of us are trying to work from home and some of us have real responsibilities, and I wanted to tell him that this is my place, that I do own it, that my name is on the deed, and my sweat is in the floorboards, and my tears are probably somewhere in the foundation from all the nights I cried. Missing his daddy, Frank, but the words just wouldn't come, because when someone you love attacks you like that, your throat closes up and your heart starts hammering against your ribs, like a bird trying to escape a cage. I would been making breakfast for Emma. Sweet little Emma, who is only 2 but already knows that Grandma makes the best pancakes with real strawberry syrup that takes me an hour to prepare from fresh berries. And she would been fussy that morning, crying for her special breakfast, the way little ones do when their routine gets disturbed. But apparently even loving my granddaughter was now an inconvenience in their eyes. Even caring for that precious baby was somehow wrong. "I was just trying to help with Emma," I said, and my voice came out so quiet I could barely hear it myself, over the morning breeze coming through the windows I would installed. With my own hands 15 years ago, when the old ones finally gave up the ghost. And Frank wasn't there anymore to help me, but I did it anyway, because that is what you do when you own something. You take care of it. Amanda laughed then, and it was such a cold sound, like January wind across the Hudson Valley when it cuts right through your coat and chills you to the bone. "Help? You call spoiling her rotten with sugar and letting her make messes helpful?" She doesn't need another enabler. Ruth, she needs structure. And the way she said my name, like it tasted bitter in her mouth, like saying it was doing me some kind of favor, that is when I knew for certain what I would been suspecting for months now, that they didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as a problem that needed solving. You know what it is like when someone says your name like that? Like it is a burden to even acknowledge your existence. It cuts deeper than any curse word ever could, because your name is supposed to be something precious, something that connects you to the people who love you. But when it becomes a weapon, when it becomes something they spit out like bad medicine, well, that is when you know you are not welcome in your own life anymore. This wasn't about pancakes or noise or morning routines. This was about them wanting me gone from the house I would built into a home through decades of labor and love and sacrifice. This was about them seeing me as an obstacle to their plans instead of the foundation their whole life was built on. And Michael, my Michael, who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms and beg me to tell him stories about the old days. He crossed his arms, and that wedding ring caught the light from the chandelier I would hung in this very spot after Frank died, and I was trying to make the house feel less empty. We have been patient, he said, and I wanted to laugh at that word, patient, like they would been doing me some enormous favor by living in my house rent. Free for 8 months while I stretched my Social Security check to cover groceries for 4 people instead of 1. But this cannot continue. You are 72 years old, and all you do is putter around here like you are still useful. You are not. You are a burden, and we are done pretending otherwise. A burden. Lord have mercy. A burden. Do you know what it feels like to be called a burden by the child you raised? The child you loved through every fever and heartbreak and growing pain? It is like having your heart ripped out through your throat while you are still breathing, like being told that everything you ever gave, every sacrifice you ever made, every sleepless night you spent worrying and caring and loving, all of it was just you being a burden on the world. I looked around that kitchen, taking in the painted cabinets I would refinish during a particularly harsh winter when money was tight, and I couldn't afford a contractor, working in the garage with space heaters running because the fumes were too strong for inside, my fingers so cold they could barely hold the brush. But I kept going because this was my home, and I was going to make it beautiful. Every corner of that room held memories of Michael's childhood, the spot where he would carved his initials into the wooden windowsill when he was 12 and thought he was being sneaky, the breakfast bar where he would done his homework while I cooked dinner and helped him with math problems that made my head spin, the refrigerator that was still covered with his elementary school art projects because I would never had the heart to throw them away, never wanted to erase the evidence of how proud I was of every little thing he did. This is my house, I said, and the words came out stronger than I felt inside, stronger than the trembling that had started in my hands and was working its way up my arms like electricity. Not for long, Amanda muttered under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear, and she was holding Emma on her hip like a shield, using my own granddaughter to protect herself while she delivered these verbal blows that were hitting me harder than any physical attack ever could. We have already talked to that lawyer downtown about getting guardianship. Someone needs to make decisions for you since you are clearly not capable anymore. The room went dead silent, except for the ticking of the antique clock. Frank and I had bought at an estate sale in Saratoga Springs during our first year of marriage, back when we thought we had forever ahead of us, back when the future looked bright and full of possibilities instead of this nightmare where my own family was plotting against me. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear exactly, but a kind of clarity I hadn't experienced in months. Like when you are walking in fog, and suddenly the wind shifts, and you can see exactly where you are and exactly how lost you have been. They weren't just trying to push me out. They were planning to take control of everything I would worked for, everything I would built, everything I would earned through 40 years of teaching children, and 25 years of maintaining this property, and 63 years of being a decent human being who tried to do right by everyone, even when it cost me everything I had. Guardianship? I repeated, and the word felt like poison on my tongue, like something that should never be spoken in a house built with love. Michael's expression didn't change, didn't soften even a little bit. And that is when I knew this wasn't anger talking. This was a plan they would been hatching, a decision they would already made about my life, without bothering to include me in the conversation. You forget things, Ma. You left the stove on last week. You cannot handle stairs the way you used to. Someone needs to look out for your best interests. And every word was a lie wrapped in fake concern. Every syllable was designed to make me doubt myself, to make me think I was losing my mind when really I was just losing my family. That stove incident, Lord help me. I would turned off the burner and forgotten to put the pot away. That is all, just forgot to move a clean pot from the stove to the cabinet. But they would turned it into evidence of my mental decline, turned a simple moment of distraction into proof that I was incompetent. And that is how it starts. You know, that is how they build a case against you, taking every little human mistake and turning it into a symptom of something bigger, something that requires them to take control. My mind was as sharp as it had ever been. Sharper maybe because pain has a way of focusing your attention on what really matters. But they were painting me as incompetent so they could justify taking control of my property, my finances, my life, so they could put me somewhere convenient and turn my home into their investment opportunity. Where would I go? I asked. And I was genuinely curious about their plan. Curious about how they would convince themselves this was the right thing to do. Amanda and Michael exchanged one of those looks that married couples get. Those silent conversations where a whole discussion happens in the space between heartbeats. And I knew they would talked about this, planned this, maybe even celebrated it like it was some kind of victory. There's a really nice assisted living place in Schenectady, Amanda said with that fake cheerfulness people use when they are trying to convince you that prison is actually a vacation. It has activities and meals provided. You would probably be happier there with people your own age. People my own age. Like I was some broken toy that needed to be put away with the other broken toys. Like being 72 automatically meant I belonged in storage somewhere, waiting to die with a bunch of other people whose families had decided they were too much trouble to love anymore. You know what I mean, she said when she saw my face, backtracking like she always did when she said something cruel out loud. People who understand what you are going through. Other seniors who share your interests, but what she meant was people who were waiting to die. People who had been shuffled off by their families when they became inconvenient. People who had had their independence stripped away by children who saw them as obstacles instead of human beings with decades of wisdom and experience and love to give. I stood up slowly, and my arthritis made the movement deliberate and careful, each joint protesting like it always did in the morning. But I was far from helpless, far from the confused old woman they were trying to make me into. I built this house, I said, and my voice was steady now. Steady with a truth they couldn't argue with no matter how hard they tried. I mean that literally, after Frank died, I bought this land with the insurance money and my teaching pension, hired contractors for the foundation and the framing, because I knew my limits. But everything else, the electrical work, the plumbing, the hardwood floors, this kitchen renovation, I did that myself. Do you know what it is like to build something with your own hands? To start with raw land and turn it into a home where people can love and laugh and grow. Every outlet I wired, every pipe I connected, every board I laid. It was all done with the kind of care you can only give when you are building something for the people you love, when you are creating a legacy that will outlast your own heartbeat. Michael's jaw tightened, and I could see him searching for some way to dismiss what I would just said, some way to minimize the 25 years of work I would put into this place. That was years ago. Things change. People get older, he said, like getting older automatically erased everything you had ever accomplished. Like aging was some kind of crime that canceled out a lifetime of achievement. Yes, they do, I agreed. And I felt something shifting inside me, something that had been quiet for too long, finally finding its voice. And apparently some people get more ungrateful with age too. The words hung between us like a challenge, like a line drawn in the sand that couldn't be uncrossed. And for just a moment, I saw a flicker of the little boy I would raised, the one who used to help me sand furniture in the garage and hold the flashlight while I fixed leaky pipes. The boy who used to say he wanted to be just like me when he grew up. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by this entitled stranger who stood in my kitchen acting like I owed him something more than the roof over his head and the food in his belly and the love I would given him every single day for 28 years. "We are not ungrateful," Amanda said, and her voice had that defensive edge that people get when they know they are wrong but cannot admit it. "We moved here to help you. We gave up our apartment in Albany to be closer, to make sure you weren't alone." And I wanted to laugh at that, wanted to ask her when exactly this help was supposed to start, because all I would seen was two adults who treated my home like a free hotel, and my love like an obligation. "You moved here because your lease was up and you needed free housing," I said. And the truth felt good on my tongue, felt clean and honest in a way that cut through all their pretty lies. "You have been here 8 months, and neither of you has paid rent, utilities, or even groceries. I am not ungrateful. I am broke. My Social Security barely covers the property taxes on this place, and my savings are gone because I have been supporting all 3 of you." That was the truth they didn't want to acknowledge. The reality behind all their talk about helping and caring and doing me favors. My fixed income couldn't sustain 4 people. Couldn't stretch to cover the extra food and heat and electricity that comes with a young family. But every time I would try to discuss financial contributions, they would remind me that they were doing me a favor by living here, keeping me company, helping with maintenance, except Michael hadn't fixed a single thing since moving in, and Amanda's idea of helping was rearranging my furniture to suit her taste, and complaining about the smell of the wood polish I would been using for decades. "Money isn't everything," Michael said, but his voice was weak now. Weak because he knew I was right, and he had no answer for it. "No, but it is something," I replied. "And respect is something too. When was the last time either of you said thank you? When was the last time you acknowledged that this is my home, not yours?" The questions hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering too long, and Emma started fussing. That sweet baby sensing the tension in the room, even at her young age, and Amanda bounced her gently while using the distraction to avoid answering, because the truth was they would never thanked me. Never once. They would moved in with the assumption that I owed them housing and food and childcare and whatever else they needed, simply because Michael was my son. But Michael wasn't my biological son, and that fact seemed to matter less when he needed something, and more when he wanted to assert his independence. I would adopted him when he was 9 years old, after his mama Sarah died in that terrible car accident on Route 2 outside Petersburg, and his daddy had never been in the picture anyway, just some boy who would run off when Sarah told him she was pregnant. Sarah's parents were too old and too sick to take on a grieving child, and I was 38, recently divorced after my first marriage fell apart, lonely in this big farmhouse I would bought to start fresh after my own heartbreak. Michael had needed a home and I would needed a purpose, and it had seemed like perfect timing, like God putting us together just when we both needed saving. I raised him as my own, loved him through every stage of growing up, through teenage rebellion and first heartbreak and college applications, and wedding planning never made him feel adopted or different or less than, never reminded him that he wasn't my blood when he disappointed me or made mistakes the way some people do. I would celebrated every milestone like he was born from my own body, had been there for every fever and every triumph and every moment in between. But now, standing in my kitchen being told I was a burden, I wondered if the gratitude had ever been real or just performance, just something he thought. He owed me until he decided he didn't anymore. "I think we all need to calm down," Amanda said, in that condescending tone people use when they want to end a conversation without resolving anything, when they want to make the other person feel like they are being unreasonable for having feelings about being attacked in their own home. "Emma needs her nap, and we all need to think about what is best for everyone. And what was best for everyone I knew was for me to disappear quietly so they could claim this house without guilt, so they could have their inheritance while I was still alive to see them enjoy it. What was best for me was something I would never really considered before. My own happiness, my own peace, my own freedom from people who saw me as an obligation rather than a blessing. And that thought was so foreign, so selfish, feeling after a lifetime of putting everyone else first, that it almost scared me. But not quite. Not anymore. Because when you reach the point where your own family calls you dead weight, you start to realize that maybe it is time to stop carrying everyone else and start carrying yourself for a change. I didn't say anything else that morning. Just made lunch for Emma while Michael and Amanda exchanged worried looks like they were starting to realize they might have pushed too hard, revealed too much of their plan too soon. I cleaned up the kitchen with my usual care, wiping down those granite countertops I would saved so long to afford. Straightening the dish towels I would embroidered myself during lonely evenings after Frank died. Going through all the motions of normal life, while inside me something fundamental was shifting. Something that had been sleeping for too long was finally waking up. That afternoon, I retreated to my bedroom to think, and through the window I could see the vegetable garden I would been tending for 25 years. The apple trees Frank and I had planted as saplings back when we thought we would grow old together under their shade. The stone walkway I would laid myself one summer when my back was stronger and my dreams were bigger. Everything outside these windows belonged to me. Legally and morally, every flower and tree and blade of grass was mine by right of purchase and care and love. But the people inside the house were making it clear that my ownership was temporary, that they were just waiting for me to die or disappear so they could claim what they would already decided was theirs. That night, while Michael and Amanda watched television in the living room, I would wallpapered by hand during a particularly cold February when I couldn't afford to hire anyone. I sat at the small desk in my bedroom and began to make plans, not plans for assisted living or guardianship or surrendering my independence, but plans for taking it back, plans for showing them exactly what dead weight really looks like when it decides to stop being so accommodating. The first thing I did was call Janet Morrison, my lawyer who had handled Frank's estate and Michael's adoption papers all those years ago. Janet was my age, sharp as a tack even at 71, and she had no patience for family members who tried to manipulate elderly clients. Had seen too many cases where adult children swooped in like vultures the moment their parents showed any sign of vulnerability. "Ruth," she said when I explained the situation, and her voice was gentle but determined. "Do you want to fight this, or do you want to disappear?" It was an interesting way to phrase the question, but I understood exactly what she meant, because I would been thinking the same thing, weighing my options like they were stones in my hand, feeling the weight of each choice. I could dig in my heels, document their financial abuse, wage a legal battle to maintain control of my home and my life, spend whatever time I had left fighting people who should have been loving me instead of attacking me. Or I could take my power back in a different way, one that would teach them a lesson they would never forget while giving me the peace I would been missing for so long. "I want to disappear," I said, and the words felt like freedom on my tongue, but on my terms. Janet understood immediately because she would seen this scenario play out dozens of times. Adult children who moved in with elderly parents under the guise of helping, then gradually took control until the parent became a prisoner in their own home, dependent on people who saw them as a burden instead of a blessing. The legal system was slow and complicated, and by the time guardianship hearings were resolved, the damage was often done. The elderly person stripped of dignity and independence, while their children argued over assets like they were already dead. But property ownership was different. Property ownership was power, and as long as my name was on that deed, I had options they couldn't take away no matter how many lawyers they hired or how many doctors they convinced to question my competency. "Give me a week," Janet said. "I will have everything ready," and I knew she would because Janet Morrison had been fighting for people like me longer than Michael had been alive, had made a career out of protecting the vulnerable from the very people who should have been protecting them. I spent that week observing my son and his wife more carefully than I ever had before, watching how they moved through my house, like they owned it, how they made plans for renovations without consulting me, how they spoke about me in the third person even when I was in the room like I was furniture, that couldn't hear or understand what was happening around me. I heard Amanda on the phone with her mother, complaining about how difficult it was to live with an old woman who didn't understand boundaries, didn't know her place, didn't realize that her time was over, and theirs was just beginning. I saw Michael rolling his eyes when I asked if they could help with groceries, as if contributing to household expenses was an unreasonable request from the woman who was feeding and housing them for free, as if suggesting they pay their own way was somehow cruel or unfair instead of basic human decency. Most telling of all, I overheard them in their bedroom late one night, discussing their timeline for moving me out, talking about my life and my future, like I was a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. The lawyer said it could take 6 months to get guardianship, Michael whispered, and I had to strain to hear him through the thin walls of the house I would insulated myself. But once we do, we can put her somewhere and get control of this place. And hearing my own son talk about putting me somewhere, like I was an unwanted pet being dropped off at a shelter. That is when I knew for certain that the boy I would raised was gone, replaced by this stranger who saw me as an obstacle to his inheritance. Thank God, Amanda replied. And her relief was so obvious, so genuine, that it cut through me like a blade. I cannot pretend to be grateful much longer. She drives me crazy with all her little routines and her stories about the old days. I just want our own space, and I wanted to laugh at that, wanted to remind her that this was my space. Had always been my space, would always be my space, as long as I drew breath in my body. We will have it soon, Michael assured her. And then we can finally do something with this property. It is worth way more than she realizes, and that is when I understood that they weren't just planning to warehouse me somewhere. They were planning to sell my home, the farmhouse I would poured my heart into, the land where Frank's ashes were scattered beneath the oak tree by the fence line, the place where I would plan to live out my remaining years surrounded by memories and love and the satisfaction of a life well lived. They saw it all as a real estate opportunity. Nothing more, just another transaction in their quest for financial security at my expense. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't even try because my mind was too busy processing the magnitude of their betrayal, the depth of their ingratitude, the casual cruelty of their plans for my future. Instead, I sat by my bedroom window and watched the sunrise paint the fields. Gold, memorizing every detail of the view I would cherish for decades, saying goodbye to the life I would build while planning the life I was going to take back. By the time the sky turned blue, I would made my decision, and it felt like the first real choice I would made in months. The first time I would put my own needs ahead of someone else's convenience. And it was terrifying and liberating all at once. The next morning, while Michael was at his remote job and Amanda was running errands in town with Emma, I called Janet back and said simply, "I am ready," and she said, "The papers are drawn up. I just need you to come in and sign them." And I knew that within hours my life would change forever, that I would go from being a victim to being someone who refused to be victimized, from being dead weight to being the force that shifted everything. I took the bus into town that afternoon, something I hadn't done in months because Michael and Amanda controlled the car keys, claiming they were worried about my driving when really they were just worried about my independence, about me having the freedom to go places and do things without their knowledge or permission. The irony wasn't lost on me that they considered me too impaired to drive, but competent enough to sign away my house to them. Too confused to manage my own transportation, but clear, headed enough to make them beneficiaries of everything I would worked for. Janet's office was in that converted Victorian on Warren Street, the same building where she would practiced law for 30 years, where she would handled Frank's will and Michael's adoption, and dozens of other moments that had shaped my life. She greeted me with a hug that felt like absolution, like someone finally understood what I had been going through, and led me to her private office where thick folders of paperwork waited on her mahogany desk like promises of freedom. "This is a clean sale," she explained, as I reviewed the documents, and her voice was gentle but businesslike. "Market value, cash buyer. 30-day closing, The buyer is a young couple from Massachusetts looking for a weekend retreat. They love the property and don't want to change anything structural. And I felt a pang of sadness knowing that strangers would soon be walking through rooms where I would raised Michael, celebrated birthdays, mourned Frank's death, built a lifetime of memories that apparently meant nothing to the people I would build them for. But it was better than watching my son turn it into an investment property while shipping me off to a facility where I would die forgotten and alone. Better than becoming a prisoner in my own home while they waited for me to disappear. Better than spending whatever time I had left fighting people who should have been loving me instead of exploiting me. "Where will you go?" Janet asked gently, and I could hear the concern in her voice. The worry that I was making this decision out of anger instead of wisdom. I would already figured that out though, had spent hours researching and planning and preparing for this moment. There was a senior community in Bennington, Vermont, just across the state line. Not assisted living, but independent condominiums designed for people my age who wanted maintenance. Free living without giving up their autonomy. I would visited the previous week while Amanda thought I was at a doctor's appointment. Had toured the facilities and met with the sales director and fallen in love with the idea of living somewhere that I would chosen for myself, instead of somewhere my family had chosen for me. The units were small but bright, with modern kitchens and bathrooms. I wouldn't have to worry about maintaining access to a library and fitness center and social activities that were optional rather than mandatory. Most importantly, no one there would treat me like a burden or question my right to make my own decisions. No one would see my age as evidence of incompetence or my independence as something to be managed. "I will be fine," I told Janet. And I meant it. I will be free. And that word tasted like on my tongue, sweet and golden and full of possibilities I would forgotten existed. The closing was scheduled for the following Friday, which gave me exactly 10 days to pack my belongings and prepare for Michael and Amanda's reaction. 10 days to say goodbye to the life I would known, and hello to the life I was choosing. I decided not to tell them until the sale was final and the deed was transferred, until there was nothing they could do to stop me or convince me or manipulate me back into being their victim. They would been making plans behind my back for months. After all, seemed only fair to return the favor. Those 10 days were the strangest of my life. Moving through my daily routines knowing they were coming to an end, saying goodbye to rooms and objects and rituals that had defined my existence for over 2 decades. I packed slowly and quietly, choosing what mattered most and donating the rest to charity, keeping Frank's watch and my mother's china and the quilt my grandmother had made, letting go of furniture and books and kitchen gadgets that had served their purpose but didn't need to follow me into whatever came next. The volunteers who picked up my donations were kind and efficient, didn't ask questions when I explained that I was downsizing, didn't make me feel like I needed to justify my choices or explain my decisions to anyone except myself. Michael and Amanda noticed the missing items, but assumed I was finally decluttering, finally accepting that I had too much stuff for someone my age. "It is good that you are getting rid of things," Amanda said approvingly, when she saw that I would emptied out the spare bedroom. We were going to suggest that anyway, and I wanted to tell her that her suggestions weren't needed anymore, that I was perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my own belongings. But I just smiled and nodded, because in less than a week none of it would matter anymore. They thought I was preparing the house for their permanent occupation, had no idea I was preparing to disappear from their lives forever. And there was something almost funny about how completely they would misunderstood the situation, how thoroughly they would underestimated the woman they would decided to dismiss. On Friday morning I sat in Janet's office and signed the final paperwork, watched my signature transfer ownership of everything I would build to people who would appreciate it, who would care for it the way it deserved to be cared for. The buyers were present, David and Susan Chen, both professors at Williams College, and they were excited about the property, respectful of its history, asking thoughtful questions about the garden and the renovations I would done over the years. "We promised to take good care of it," Susan said as we shook hands. And her sincerity was obvious, genuine in a way that made my heart ache for what Michael and Amanda could have been if they would chosen gratitude over greed. It is clear this house has been deeply loved. And I thanked her, meant it. Because she was right. It had been loved, every board and beam and window pane had been loved by someone who understood that a house isn't just a building. It is a keeper of memories, a shelter for dreams, a foundation for everything that matters. I walked outside into the crisp October air with a cashier's check for $485,000 in my purse. Enough money to buy my new condominium outright and live comfortably for the rest of my life. But more importantly, enough money to prove to myself that I still had value, still had worth, still had the power to control my own destiny, even at 72 years old. I took a taxi back to the farmhouse, knowing it would be my last time walking through the front door as the owner. And Michael's car was in the driveway, which meant he was home for lunch, which meant perfect timing for what I had to do next. I found him in the kitchen making a sandwich and scrolling through his phone. And he looked up when I entered. His expression mildly curious but mostly disinterested. The way you might look at a neighbor who had stopped by unexpectedly. "Where have you been?" he asked. Not really caring about the answer, just making noise to fill the silence. "Taking care of business," I said. Sitting down at the kitchen table, where we would shared thousands of meals over the years, where I would help him with homework and listened to his problems and celebrated his victories, where I would thought we were building a relationship that would last forever. "What kind of business?" His tone was distracted, dismissive, the way adults speak to children who interrupt their important activities. And I realized that is exactly how he saw me now, as a child who needed to be managed rather than a woman who deserved to be respected. I pulled the deed from my purse and placed it on the table in front of him, watching his face as he registered what he was seeing, watching the color drain from his cheeks as he read the words that would change everything. Michael's phone clattered to the floor, and for a moment he couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was looking at, couldn't understand how his carefully laid plans had been demolished in a single morning. "What is this?" he whispered, and his voice was so small, so broken, that for just a second I felt sorry for him, felt the old maternal instinct to comfort and protect and make everything better. "It is the deed to this house," I said calmly. "The house I sold this morning to David and Susan Chen. They will be taking possession on December 1st, and watching him process those words was like watching someone realize they would been walking on thin ice all along, that the ground they would thought was solid was actually nothing but cold water waiting to swallow them up." For a long moment, Michael couldn't speak, just stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish pulled from water. When he finally found his voice, it came out as a croak, broken and desperate and full of disbelief. "You sold the house?" "I sold my house," I corrected. Because precision mattered now, because the truth was the only thing I had left to give him. "The house you and Amanda have been planning to take away from me anyway." And his face went from pale to red in seconds, anger replacing shock as he realized that his victim had turned into his opponent. "You cannot do this. This is our home. Emma's home. You cannot just sell it without telling us." And he was shouting now, loud enough to wake the baby if she would been sleeping, loud enough to bring the neighbors running if they would been the type to interfere. But I just sat there calmly, feeling more peaceful than I had in months. "I can and I did," I said, standing up slowly, carefully, with all the dignity I could muster. "It is my house, my name on the deed, my decision to make, just like it was your decision to treat me like a burden and plan to put me in assisted living." And watching him realize that I would heard their conversations, that I knew about their plans, that was almost worth all the pain they would cause me. "We never said assisted living," he protested. But his voice was weak now. Weak because he knew I was right, and there was nothing he could do to change what had already been done. "Amanda did. Last week. And you said I was dead weight this morning. Remember? You said you were tired of carrying me." I picked up the deed and folded it carefully, like it was something precious instead of the instrument of his destruction. "Well, now you don't have to carry me anymore. You don't have to carry anything of mine, actually." Michael stood up so fast his chair fell over. the sound echoing through the kitchen like a gunshot, and he looked so young suddenly, so lost and scared and desperate that I almost felt sorry for him again, almost wanted to take it all back and pretend none of this had happened. "Ma, please. You cannot do this. We will change. We will treat you better. We will pay rent. We will help more. Whatever you want. Just don't sell the house." And there it was, the begging I would been waiting for. The acknowledgement that they needed me more than I needed them. But it was too late for promises, too late for bargaining, too late for anything except the consequences of their choices. "Where are we supposed to go?" he asked. And for a moment I heard the little boy I would raised, scared and alone and needing someone to take care of him. But that little boy was gone, had been gone for years, replaced by this man who saw me as an obstacle to his inheritance, instead of the woman who had given him everything. "The same place I was supposed to go when you decided I was too much trouble," I said. "You will figure it out. You are young, employed, capable, you have advantages I don't have." And it was true, they did have advantages. They had each other and their health and their whole lives ahead of them, while I had nothing but my Social Security check and the house they would been planning to steal from me. Amanda chose that moment to return from town with Emma, and I heard the car doors slam, heard her voice calling out cheerfully as she entered through the front door, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse around her. "Michael, I got those organic crackers Emma likes. And the store had those apples you wanted for." Her voice trailed off as she entered the kitchen, and saw Michael's stricken face, saw the deed in my hands, saw the way the air itself seemed to vibrate with tension and disaster. "What is wrong?" she asked, shifting Emma to her other hip, and Michael handed her the deed without saying a word, just passed it over like he was handing her a death sentence, which in a way I suppose he was. I watched Amanda's expression change as she read it, watched confusion become disbelief, become fury, watched her face twist with rage as she realized that all their plans, all their schemes, all their casual cruelty had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. "You sold the house?" she shouted, and Emma started crying. That sweet baby picking up on the tension and fear that was filling the room like smoke. "How could you do this to us? We have a baby!" "We have nowhere to go," and I wanted to point out that having a baby was their choice, that having nowhere to go was the consequence of their decision to live rent-free instead of building their own financial security. But there was no point in arguing with people who would never understand that actions have consequences. "You have 8 weeks to find somewhere," I said matter-of-factly. "That is more notice than you were planning to give me." And Amanda's face twisted with rage, with the kind of fury that comes when someone who is used to being in control suddenly realizes they never had any power at all. "This is insane. You are a crazy old woman. We are going to fight this. We are going to sue you for everything you have." And there it was, the threat I would been expecting, the attempt to intimidate me back into submission. But it didn't work anymore, because I had Janet Morrison on my side, and the law on my side, and most importantly, the truth on my side. "Good luck with that," I said, and I meant it. "I am mentally competent, the sale was legal, and I have witnesses to your threats to seek guardianship and put me in a facility. Janet Morrison has documented everything." And watching the fight go out of Amanda was like watching air leave a punctured balloon, sudden and complete and irreversible. She knew as well as I did that they had no legal standing to challenge the sale, knew that the house had always been mine and I would never added their names to the deed, despite their hints and suggestions over the years, knew that their greed had finally caught up with them in the worst possible way. "Where will you go?" Michael asked again, and his voice was hollow now, empty of everything except desperation and disbelief. "Somewhere I will be respected," I said. "Somewhere people will be grateful for my presence instead of treating it like an imposition." And I didn't tell them about the condominium in Bennington or the new life I was planning because they didn't deserve to know that I would be just fine without them, that I would be better than fine, that I would be happy for the first time in years. That night, I finished packing my personal belongings into boxes and suitcases, taking only what truly mattered, what held real meaning instead of just taking up space. Photo albums and love letters, Frank's watch and my grandmother's quilt, a few pieces of jewelry that had been in the family for generations. That was all I needed to start over. All I needed to build a new life that would be mine and mine alone. Michael and Amanda barely spoke to me during those final weeks, moved through the house like ghosts, making frantic phone calls and searching for apartments they could afford on short notice. The reality of their situation was sinking in, the understanding that without my financial support and free housing, they would have to dramatically downsize their lifestyle, have to live within their means instead of beyond them at my expense. I felt no satisfaction in their panic, but I felt no guilt either, because they would made their choices, and now they would live with the consequences the same way I would been living with the consequences of loving them too much and expecting too little in return. On December 1st, I stood on the front porch of the farmhouse one last time and handed the keys to David and Susan Chen. Watched them accept the responsibility of caring for something I would loved with my whole heart, something I was trusting them to honor and protect and appreciate the way it deserved. The moving truck had already taken my belongings to Vermont, and my taxi was waiting in the driveway to take me to my new life, to the condominium I would chosen for myself in a community where my age would be seen as wisdom instead of weakness, where my independence would be celebrated instead of questioned. Michael and Amanda had moved out the previous day, loading their possessions into a rental truck with grim efficiency, and there had been no tearful goodbyes, no apologies, no acknowledgement of the years I would spent loving and supporting them. They simply left, taking Emma with them, and leaving behind only empty rooms, and the echo of harsh words that could never be unsaid. "Take care of this place," I told the Chens as I handed over the keys. "It has been a good home," and Susan squeezed my hand gently, promised that they would, thanked me for trusting them with something so obviously precious. And I believed them because they understood what Michael and Amanda never had, that a home is more than just property. It is a sacred trust. The taxi ride to Vermont took 2 hours, winding through mountains painted with autumn colors and small towns that looked like postcards. And I watched the landscape change outside my window while feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Anticipation for the future instead of dread about what each day might bring. My new condominium was everything the brochure had promised, and more bright and modern, with large windows that overlooked a community garden and walking trails. My neighbors friendly without being intrusive, the social activities optional rather than mandatory. For the first time in years, I could make my own choices about how to spend my days, could eat what I wanted when I wanted it, could speak or stay silent as the mood struck me, without someone criticizing my routines or dismissing my opinions. I settled into my new life quickly, morning coffee on my private balcony afternoon, walks around the community, evening book club meetings in the library where people actually listened when I spoke, where my stories about the old days were welcomed instead of tolerated. I made new friends who didn't see my age as a limitation or my independence as a threat, who valued my experience instead of dismissing it as irrelevant rambling from someone whose time was past. Most importantly, I rediscovered the pleasure of solitude, the peace that comes from living authentically, without having to justify your existence to people who see you as a burden. No one criticized my cooking or complained about my routines. No one sighed when I moved slowly or rolled their eyes when I shared memories. No one made me feel like an inconvenience for simply being alive and occupying space in the world. 3 months after the sale, I received a package with no return address, and inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in familiar handwriting. "We hope you are satisfied with what you have done. You destroyed your own family," and I read it twice before throwing it away because they still didn't understand, still couldn't see that they had destroyed our family long before I sold the house, that the sale was just the final acknowledgement of what they would already broken with their selfishness and disrespect. I never responded to the letter, and I never heard from them again. Sometimes wondered about Emma, whether she would remember her grandmother who used to make special pancakes and sing old songs. But I would learn that you cannot maintain relationships with people who see you as a burden. even if one of them carries your DNA, or your last name, or your hopes for the future. The truth is, if you have ever been in this situation, if you have ever felt like a stranger in your own life, if you have ever been made to feel like your existence is an inconvenience to the people who should love you most, then you know that sometimes the best thing you can do is disappear on your own terms. Take control of your story instead of letting other people write the ending for you. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet and permanent, like keys on a table and a new address that no one can take away from you. Sometimes it is the simple act of choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing everyone else, of finally understanding that being kind doesn't mean being weak, and getting older doesn't mean giving up your power. If this story touched something in your heart, if it reminded you of your own struggles or someone you love, I hope you will subscribe to Her Light, because this is where we share these difficult truths, where silence ends and healing begins, where women like us finally get to tell our stories without apology or shame. Until next time, remember that your voice matters, your experiences are valid, and your happiness is worth fighting for. No matter how old you are or how long you have been putting everyone else first, stand tall, speak your truth, and never let anyone convince you that you are asking for too much when all you want is basic human respect.